coming out of those organizations or those institutions who put him on a pedestal, they describe him as a pioneer, a brilliant contributor. They'll say that he was a controversial figure. Oh, and by the way, he supported pedophilia and he supported incest. Yeah, well, we could be here hours talking about John, but, for your audience to understand, you see, it's very important to know where this idea came from. The idea that is, the foundation of gender ideology, which is that we have a separate identity apart from our biology, apart from what our body says that we are, that we have a mental or psychological sex. And that's what John Money called gender. And, he developed this idea of gender identity. And he said that we are all born gender neutral. And that any of us could eventually end up identifying as either male or female. It all depends on our environment and what kind of toys we're given and what our parents expect of us. And so he said that it was a social construct, that male and female were social constructs, okay? And he conducted an experiment on a family that came to him, the Reimer family. And they came to him because they had twin boys who, when the boys were being circumcised at the age of 8 months, there was a malfunction of the machinery, and one of the boys had his penis that was burnt off. And so they had one twin who was normal and healthy. The other twin was born normal and healthy, but he now had his penis burnt off. He essentially had no penis. And so these people ended up turning to John Money because he became known in the culture as the person who was the expert on what to do with these kids that were either born with some sort of chromosome or medical problem, or they had an accident like the Reimer twin did. And he was saying, raise these boys as girls. Just go ahead. If you can do it early enough, before the age of 3, he said, castrate the boy and raise him as a girl with a girl's name and girls' pronouns and toys and everything else. So it's a long story, as you know.
Yeah.
But essentially, what happened, just to make it, clear to your audience in a few sentences, this boy, originally Bruce, was raised as a girl. He was called Brenda. He was not told about his history, and his twin was also not told. And they were raised, they were born in the late 60s. So they were raised as a boy and a girl separately. And they reported back to Dr. Money every so often. Dr. Money saw them in his office at Johns Hopkins, which is in Baltimore. I don't know if your listeners are aware, but it's quite a distance from where this family lived in Winnipeg, Canada. But the family would travel down every year to see John Money. And John Money, when the twins were 6, he reported that the experiment was a complete success. He reported that Brenda was thriving as a girl, that she was doing very well, that maybe she was a bit of a tomboy, but overall she was identifying as a girl, comfortable as a girl, and doing well. And he got a tremendous amount of attention and fame from this experiment. He wrote about it in many different places, and both in the medical and psychological field, and also outside, in just the regular lay literature, in the culture. And this was a very remarkable piece of information. You can imagine that that a boy could be raised as a girl, and the assumption was made vice versa, of course, more complicated, but the assumption was made that we are born gender neutral, and that our masculinity and femininity is something that is socially put on us by society. So that was a very big deal. Now, unfortunately, the truth is that Brenda was not doing well. She was suffering a great deal. She did not feel comfortable as a girl. She didn't know what was wrong with her, but she preferred her brother's toys. She was extremely aggressive. She tore off her dresses. She was interested she would urinate standing up. She was interested in everything that her father was into, not her mother. She did not make friends. She was made fun of. She was mocked for the very masculine way that she behaved. People called her cave woman. She wanted to be a car mechanic. To make a long story short, I'm not making it that short, but she became suicidal when she entered puberty. John Money was putting tremendous pressure on Brenda to undergo surgery and have a vagina constructed, and she would hear nothing about it. She became suicidal. She was also attracted to girls, which was terrifically difficult for her. And in the end, her parents did end up telling her the truth. When she learned the truth, she was tremendously relieved. She immediately went to living as a boy. She picked the name David because she felt that, like David, like the biblical David, she had been fighting a huge Goliath in her life. Now, she went through surgeries. She lived as a man. She married, David married a woman and adopted the woman's children. But eventually, unfortunately, he committed suicide. His brother died of a drug overdose. Now, the parents held John Money responsible for the death of the twins. Aside from experimenting on them, aside from that, he had been sexually abusing the twins every time that they came down to see him every year.
Ouch.
So John Money was a bad person. John Money was a wicked person. And the thing is, Jay, he never publicly announced that the experiment was a failure. Even he knew, because David's mother wrote to John Money and told him that Brenda was no longer Brenda. Brenda was living was a boy. And yet John Money never went back and said to the medical community, the mental health community, and he never said, you know what, actually, this was not a success. I guess that, there was more going on before David was born that determined his masculinity and his identity as a boy. We are not born gender neutral.
If you're getting value from this podcast, maglalambing lang ako sa inyo. Baka pwede naman mag-subscribe kayo. Paki-like na rin at papindot ng notification bell para para close friends na tayo.
One thing I noticed that I mentioned already is the gaslighting happening in John Money's time. He's being hailed as a breakthrough doctor that time, but there were dissenters already in his time, just like
There
what's happening today. Do gender studies at least acknowledge the contribution of money, who they're attributing their gender theory to, at least the modern gender studies course?
Well, I'm no expert in gender studies. I have never seen anything, coming out of those organizations or those institutions who put him on a pedestal. They describe him as a pioneer, as, a brilliant contributor. They'll say that he was a controversial figure. Oh, and by the way, he supported pedophilia and he supported incest. So he was really about destroying Judeo-Christian values in our society. Gender was just one way in which he was seeking to do that. So the answer to your question, I believe, is no. I believe that I might be wrong. If one of your listeners has other information, please do email me, MIRIAM GROSSMAN MD .com. You can email me.
Okay.
But as far as I know, it's still held up as a pioneer.